Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the weekly roundup of stuff that I have read at some point in my past. I've got 4 things to talk about this week. I'm going to crack on with it.
Sophie Vlogs!
And I'm going to kick things off with a book that I absolutely loved. This is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This follows Cassiopeia Tun. It's set in Jazz Age, Mexico. And Cassiopeia she's having a bit of a boring, hard life, essentially. After her father died quite young, her and her mother moved back in with her mother's father, her grandfather. Essentially, Cassiopeia is looked down upon. She's essentially treated like a servant by this family. She has a very hard life. She deals with a lot of misogyny, especially from her cousin Martin. One day, Cassiopeia accidentally frees a god of death, and shenanigans ensue. They go on an adventure. There turns out to be a grander tussle between this death god and his brother. I just had the most wonderful time reading this book, and I now want to go away and read all of the other things that Silvia Moreno Garcia has written, and I know that she's written quite diversely across genre and stuff, so I think this is going to be an author that I'm going to really enjoy exploring further. The things I loved about this book: first of all, I really loved the descriptions. The descriptions felt very, for a book called Gods of Jade and Shadow, I always felt really drawn to like the colour in descriptions and that sort of thing. Both descriptions of the places they are in as they are travelling on this sort of quest that they are on, and then also the descriptions of the underworld, that sort of thing. There was a lot of really evocative, like, colour descriptions and ideas and stuff like that, and it was just a really gorgeous experience to like immerse myself in reading. This was one of those books where I simultaneously wanted to devour it really quickly, but I made myself stop after I would read a couple of chapters at a time because I wanted to really sit with it. As well as those descriptions, I also just really enjoyed the characters. Cassiopeia was very compelling to me because she's had a hard life, but I really enjoyed, as this went on, there is a side of her that maybe would want to punish people for the life that she has lived, but there is also a side of her that recognises that perpetuating a cycle is not necessarily a good thing for you. I felt like there was a really compelling character journey between just of Cassiopeia figuring out what she wants. Like, she's lived her whole life with these dreams that she's never been confident enough to, like, speak aloud in many ways. And then she finally has this opportunity to escape that life of drudgery. And then it's like, what do you actually want to do with this life now that you have freedom? And so much of this, her drive in it felt like wanting to hold on to that freedom that she has and the recognition that freedom can be temporary and that sort of thing. I found her journey really compelling. There is, as you might expect, there's like a bit of a romance that happens in this. And like the yearning and like these unspoken moments and these acknowledgements of things that won't necessarily be able to last. I don't know. I got really sucked into the characters. I got really sucked into the place. I just had the most fun. And a lot of these topics that were being explored in like the crescendo and stuff of this just really, really appealed to me, and I just had a wonderful time. Next up, I also listened to a book, which is a bit rare for me. I'm not a big audiobook person. I listened to Carmilla by Jade, Sheridan, Fanu. But I listened to it on YouTube. If you're a fan of the web series Carmilla, which is an adaptation of that original novel, the Epic TV channel posted a chapter a day of Elise and Natasha, who were the 2 leads in the Carmilla series, reading a chapter per day of Carmilla, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad, I had it on my Kindle anyway to read at some point, but I'm really glad that I ended up consuming it in this way, with these 2 actresses reading it, because it was just really fun. I'm not sure if I have the largest amount to say on the novel. I kind of had an idea of where it was going anyway, and I think it kind of reminded me of Dracula in some ways in its structure, insofar as it's a very short novella. It's only about 100 and something pages, and a lot of that is sort of building up, like, what is going on? Why are all these people coming down with this mysterious illness? What is Laura experiencing? And then crescendos right at the end, and you get the reveal, which I think if you are consuming this, especially having seen the web series, you know what the reveal is going to be. But I still enjoyed that process of seeing the seeds that were given, and then this final sort of like explanation, shocking reveal, wrapping everything up again, that sort of moment. It was really fun to read a sort of like a genre study, if you will, as well as looking at adaptation and looking at what exactly the web series adaptation did preserve and what they've very much worked on and embellished on. I definitely would say, obviously, the web series took it and ran with it and turned it into something a lot fuller, which I really enjoyed, but it was interesting to see those original, what are the pieces that they've taken from this original source and then built on. That was fun. If I was to do more of an analysis of the text, I would feel like I have to read it myself, because I find audio is not my best way of taking in information, so I definitely enjoyed doing it in these chapter bursts, because as someone who tends to take stuff in visually more than audially, it worked really well for me having a chapter and sitting with it and really paying attention to one chapter and not wandering off in my brain and missing important things. But yeah, I just wanted to mention it because it was a really fun experience to consume it, and I would recommend it, and I will link down below. By the time this is going up, this will probably be old news. It will have been a few months after I filmed this, because I have a backlog of these. But yeah, I would really recommend it. It was a lot of fun. My final piece of fiction is Aquila, which is by Gordon Rennie, Lee Gallagher, Patrick Goddard, and Paul Davidson. This is a 2000 AD Ultimate Collection bind-up of a comic that originally ran in 2000 AD. Aquila follows Aquila, who was one of the gladiators involved in Spartacus's uprising. People who took part in that uprising were crucified by the Romans as punishment, and in this world he sends out a cry for vengeance, and a god of vengeance hears him, and he essentially becomes an immortal warrior, and he kind of serves the god of vengeance. So sometimes that means that he's fighting for the Romans, sometimes that means that he's doing other things. He does have some freedom, but essentially he's beholden to the god of vengeance, and if the god of vengeance tells him to do something, he has to do it. And there's a lot of reaping of souls to please them and that sort of thing. As this goes on, essentially he is attempting to find a way out of this bargain, or scope out the limits of the bargain, and there's a bit more at play. It spans quite a breadth of time because he is immortal. I enjoyed reading this. It's not my favourite one of the 2000 AD collections that I've read, and I think partly that's because I didn't feel like the character grows much. Bearing in mind this takes place over quite a lot of time. The first little snippet you get is Boudica's rebellion, and then we go through to Nero and stuff like this. So it spans an expanse of time, but I felt like Aquila never changed. He felt very much the same throughout, which is maybe just because this is a tale that is told, this is a collection of the comics that ran in individual 2000 AD issues, so there would have been small arcs that then build into this piece. So maybe the focus is not necessarily on growing this character, but it's on each one of these runs having a little mini arc for the run. I just felt like maybe I would have preferred a little bit of character growth, because he's just the same. Also, this is very gory and violent. I'm not the biggest gore violence person. It was fine, and I read it and I found it interesting to be okay, what are we exploring? But some of the gory violent bits I was it's just not my jam. Slightly limited amount of stuff to say on this because I thought it was fine. It's not necessarily my favourite stuff that 2000 AD is doing. I understand why my dad bought it for me. I do like stuff that explores historical time periods, and I do find the Romans interesting, stuff like that. It's not 100% a new fave. I thought it was fine. I get why some people like it. It's just not really my jam. I'm going to finish on some poetry. This is what Sappho would have said, edited by Emma Donoghue. This is 4 centuries of love poems between women. I had a really interesting reading experience with this one, because I don't know if you can see, essentially the first 65 pages of this, I was all of these poems are absolutely fine, but none of them are speaking to me, and none of them makes me feel anything. And then in the latter half, I really don't know if you can see, I turn down pages in poetry collections with poetry that I particularly love, that I want to revisit. So many pages turned down. So essentially I reached the mid to late 1800s, and then I suddenly got really into a lot of these poems, and they really spoke to me. And I was thinking about it, and I think that's partly because Emma Donoghue did a really interesting thing with this collection, where there are a lot of poems in this that are very explicitly about love between women. There are some poems in this which are a little bit more ambiguous, and she said in the introduction, that one thing she was aiming to do was collate pieces that you can read as expressing love between women. So some of them are a little bit more ambiguous, especially from times that are longer ago. And I think that's why I sort of didn't super connect with a lot of poems in the first like 60 pages or so. Because number one, a lot of them were in the tradition of like romantic friendship, which is a concept that I find quite interesting, and it's like it was like a socially acceptable way for women to express love between each other, because it was like these really really intense friendships, and sometimes when you read these pieces, it's hard. You can see you're like, where is the line? Like, is this just a very intense friendship, or is there something more there? That sort of thing. And a lot of the time, romantic friendships were like a socially acceptable way that women could explore relationships with each other and stuff like that, which is very interesting. It's just some of the poems from longer ago. Maybe it's the way they're expressing love, maybe it's the wording, maybe it's the ambiguity, maybe it's the less explicit love, like romantic love, that sort of thing. I just didn't super connect to a lot of those. And then from about the late 1800s onwards, some of these poems like reached in and grabbed my heart, and I was just like, this is like, some of them were like so tender, and I was like, oh my god, the yearning. And then some of them are like really explicitly, like, some of them were like ferocious in their love, some of them were it was so interesting. And I think when I kind of got to a point where the style of the poems and the form of the poems were styles and forms that worked better for me when I'm consuming poetry, I feel like I really settled in, and I just got like really, at times I just get really overwhelmed with like how beautiful some of this love is. I don't feel like I have explicitly consumed a lot of poetry that is exploring love between women, and I found it really touching, and I found it really touching to see 4 centuries worth of love between women. Moving away from the poetry and about this collection as a whole, I really enjoyed the introduction because I did really enjoy understanding the process that Emma Donoghue went through to collate this, and like for example more recent poets, she's only included one poem by them each, whereas some of the older poets she's included a couple of poems by them, or some of the poets that are less well known she's included a few more poems by them, to sort of be like like these living poets that are still creating works that are very easily accessible. You could read a poem and go off and explore, but these ones that are maybe harder to find the work of, she's given you a bit more to go with. And also at the end, there is little mini biographies of each poet, and that was super interesting because, some of these poems, especially some of the earlier ones, are like, to ER or whatever, and I'm like, who is ER and what is your relationship to them? And she expands upon that in the back, and she gives you like context for them, and some of them had such interesting lives, and some of them I was like, oh, I didn't realise you were into fascism, not great. I really enjoyed this process. I think I really settled in as this went on, because I've said it before, sometimes poetry is like, yes, yes, yes for me, and other times poetry I'm like, indifferent. I really enjoyed this in the end. If you're someone who loves women and likes to read poetry, I would highly recommend it. Find the poetry that works for you within it. That is the benefit of an anthology, is that I now understand which of these poets are the type of poetry that really connects with me, and now I can go forward and I can go and explore those individual poets. Yes, so that was that. I feel like I babbled. But essentially, that's everything I wanted to talk about this week. I would love to hear from you. If you have read any of these, if you have thoughts on any of these, all of that and more, please do leave a comment down below. I always enjoy reading them. And I will see you next time for something different.